Hi, I'm Jesse Hirsh, and I'm here with my friend Allan Gregg for another episode of the Red-Tory podcast. And we're on the eve of the start of a Canadian federal election, and we got the same chaos happening in the United States. So it's an excellent opportunity for us to get together and dissect really what's in the news. So, Allan, this is where I throw to you and say, what have you been paying attention to?
You got to start. You got to start with the Canadian election. It's going to be called, within kind of a day or two, Sunday for the 28th of April. I mean, we've seen a swing in the polls, the likes of which we probably have only seen one time before, and that was in 1993 when Brian Mulroney resigned, and he was at the Justin Trudeau level. I mean, even a little lower than that in terms of approval rating. And then we got the same kind of excitement with Kim Campbell when she became the leader, and she sustained that for almost 8 months. And with hindsight, the biggest mistake she made, other than the obvious ones during the campaign, was waiting that 8 months and trying to govern rather than calling an early election as Mark Carney is right now. But when you look at how soiled that Liberal brand was, on January 6th, and what has happened in the polls right now. I mean, the most recent ones have got the Liberals up 4 to 5 points now, and that the Liberal vote is far more efficient than the Conservative vote because of all the waste that they get in rural areas and in Western Canada. I mean, if they have a 4 or 5 point lead in popular vote, they are going to have a massive majority. I did a piece for the Toronto Star, which I think is online right today, but in the newspaper tomorrow on Saturday, talking about the theme that we've talked about, character versus competence, and saying that, Mark Carney's greatest strength, which is competence right now, could become his greatest weakness, absent any sense of character. We've talked about this too. Yet Pierre Poilievre seems just completely flummoxed by everything that has happened. I know it's a cliche, but he seems to be so intent on running against Justin Trudeau with the axe to tax that he just can't get off that trope. Everything he does, just like Justin. Well, Mark Carney's nothing like Justin Trudeau by any measure, including anyone that the average voter would use. The tax has been axed. I mean, to move it over to the industrial side is basically first incomprehensible to the average person, and secondly, de minimis to anyone who actually knows anything about anything. So it's going to be an interesting 38 days. But the one thing we have learned is that campaigns really do matter. As people have grown more cynical about the political choices that are available to them, and as their partisan identification has fallen away. I mean, when I started polling, upwards of 80% of Canadians identified with one of the parties. That is, they said, I consider myself to be a progressive conservative. I consider myself to be a liberal. That is down to single digits. I may vote conservative or I may vote liberal, but I don't consider myself that. So absent that partisan lens like that, you can see tremendous volatility over the course of a campaign. So it'll be very interesting to watch.
Well, and a short campaign in a very fast-paced news cycle where I think there will be many people like us who will pay attention the entire campaign. I think there are a lot of people who will pay attention kind of casually or maybe the last minute. But my favorite kind of media shit show example was the day a monkey showed up at an IKEA in Toronto, because it wiped out all the news. Like, it didn't matter what press conference you had that day. When a monkey showed up at IKEA, all the news reported about the monkey. And Trump is that monkey, right? Any single day of the campaign, he could completely wipe the news agenda clean and make it all about him. And that is going to make it very difficult for Poilievre. That is going to make it almost impossible for the NDP to really try to distinguish themselves. I started the day this morning in Toronto and drove home through Eastern Ontario. And it's always a metric, like the fuck Trudeau flags have always been a real kind of, I'm getting into Eastern Ontario now. And interestingly enough, they've all switched to almost official conservative Canada First signs. And I'm thinking to myself, what a terrible slogan, because everybody's Canada first now.
Yeah.
Like, you're really not
Well,
distinguishing yourselves, guys.
and we saw what Rob Ford did, in this kind of environment, is that he didn't run as the PC candidate for Ontario. He ran as the premier
Yeah.
of Ontario. And Mark Carney has got that platform right now. And so he can, his press conference on day 3 would be, well, I just got off the phone with the president of France.
Yeah.
And he and I and the president of Venezuela agreed on ABC. Now, how does Pierre Poilievre compete with that? I mean, he can't at all. And so and this is what I also say in the article. I mean, the ballot question clearly established right now is who's best able to deal with Donald Trump. And if that stays till election day, Mark Carney is going to be elected as but there's lots of things that can prevent that to happen. But in terms of Trump's interventions, again, completely flummoxed, do not understand, although I heard some interesting background today, why Trump would offer on Fox News that he would prefer a liberal prime minister to a conservative. I mean, the notion that Donald Trump prefers liberals to conservatives, I don't think anyone believes that. There's a story, I think, also coming out in mainstream press tomorrow that this was actually not planted, but encouraged by J.D. Vance's friend, who is the member of parliament in Durham. And that was the back channel, and was asked very specifically to do this in order to aid Poilievre. And Poilievre immediately on the heels of this did stand up and try to make something of it. But the whole claim is so incredulous that you're hard pressed to know whether it's going to have any impact at all.
Well, I think the execution was clumsy, right?
Yeah.
I think the sentiment was if we get the big guy to make fun of the Liberals and to say the Liberals are the weak deal maker, that he'd be able to run over them, that would help us. But I don't think it came across. I think broken telephone kind of interceded. But to your point, we may see more of that. We may see more attempts to kind of tip the favor. But I think that would backfire. Like, another kind of relevant anecdote. I'm pretty broke, so I coupon the grocery store, and I love watching them post deals on Facebook. And they had a deal of like grated cheese, $4. And there was 20 comments. I'm like, why are people commenting about cheese? And I clicked the comments, and everyone was like, yeah, but it's made in USA. Don't buy it. And everyone was like, yeah, no, don't buy it. That's why it's cheap. Made in USA. No. So this is where I think the conservatives have a very difficult time in trying to harness this populist sentiment, while at the same time differentiating themselves both from the Liberals and from the Americans. I don't see it happening. I did, right? I try to do a quick news check before we start the show. And I did see the Toronto Star had a report that they asked Doug Ford for help, and he just said no.
I said I'm too busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's a very curious guy in that regard, because, when he came on the scene, everyone saw him as that kind of elbows up, pugilistic kind of conservative partisan guy. But you saw during COVID, I mean, he warmed right up to Justin Trudeau. It looked like he was going to go on the attack with Olivia Chow, who also seems to have, developed some kind of decent kind of relationship.
They seem like friends.
Yeah. And now he's rejecting the overtures from the Poilievre. Well, you see, that also is interesting because, there's academics talk about ticket splitting. This is somehow a conscious decision on the part of especially Ontarians that they want a different partisan government in Ottawa than in Queen's Park.
Yeah.
Evidence shows it's complete bullshit. It doesn't exist at all. I mean, what normally happens, people vote one way for Doug Ford, let's say, for example. And if they voted that same day federally, they would have voted for Pierre Poilievre. But in 6 months' time, they're mad at Doug Ford. And now they've switched their vote from conservative to liberal. And now they're voting for the liberal alternative. So what he's trying to do in terms of distancing himself from Poilievre in the face of the rise in liberal support, given that he's got a 4-year mandate, is really very, very intriguing and interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, here's a random wild card that just occurred to me. If the Tories are both struggling but still think that they could make some kind of move, would Stephen Harper ever kind of wade back in? Because I associate him with Polyev. Like I kind of imagine
Well,
Polyev as
he
his
was
mentee.
well, yeah, because Polyev, I mean, came on the scene when Harper was just becoming a leader. He was a seasoned veteran by then. He was his attack dog while in opposition as a front bencher. He put him in the front bench as a finance critic, and then he put him into to the cabinet. He did write what ostensibly was a fundraising letter. Harper did that attacked Carney quite directly as
Yeah.
this guy doesn't deserve any credit for 2008, 2009. That was all Jim Flaherty as Minister of Finance. And from all I can see, didn't do much in Brexit either. That was, handled by David Cameron, and he let things go to shit. And but it was the only thing I've seen other than just like Truden or sneaky Carney or the stuff. Nothing seems to work that went directly at Carney's competence.
Mm-hmm.
But this guy is not the big
Mm-hmm.
kind of super technocrat that he's preparing to. And Harper, to give him some credit, I mean, he was never well liked, but always was given credit for competence. Same thing that Carney is, and he could probably carry that message more effectively than any of the other conservatives that are extant right now. They're all seen as little glib bullshitters.
And it wouldn't take much to turn that into some kind of YouTube video, right? Or to turn that into some kind of commercial. So I'm kind of curious as to whether they're going to pull them out. And the other side to this is the liberal fortunes. They've had such a reversal that I'm also hearing lots of reports of the liberals attracting really big name candidates, right? People who all of a sudden want to be on the ballot. And one that I find particularly hilarious is Evan Solomon.
Yeah, the former CBC broadcaster, former mayor of Vancouver too. Apparently, is going to Gregor Robertson.
Yeah,
and listen, I mean that when Trudeau won in 2015, that was the foreshadow of his strength, that he was able to go out there and recruit a lot of people, including Christy Freeland.
Yeah,
as someone who wasn't a big household name, but whose credentials were absolutely
and tons of talent.
Impeccable. Yes, and many more of that kind of caliber of individuals. So we'll just it'll be an interesting 38 days for sure.
And the reason I bring up Evan Sullivan, because you say formerly of CBC, and of course he was the host of CBC Powered Politics and lost it because of a very modest scandal where he was accused of brokering an art deal. Yeah. And in my curiosity, of course, I Googled that and I found the article in The Guardian that talked about it. You know who he Googled the art deal for? Mark Carney. He sold art to Mark Carney. That was the buyer when he was the head of the Bank of England.
Really?
So I'm like, if I found this, the Tories are going to find this. Like, they have to at some point bring that up. It's just sort of total irony there.
Oh, I had no idea that, because you're right there. That doesn't look good at all.
No.
Especially with a guy who's very, very reluctant to make his assets transparent.
Yes, Now, the other piece, which I think is comical, but I'd be curious whether it has traction, is the Canada Proud people, like the memesters on the Canadian right. They've been really a part of a larger spin peddling Carney as being on Epstein Island. And there's these photos, which I'm pretty sure are AI generated, of Carney and Tom Hanks with Ghislaine Maxwell on Epstein's Island. And again, this is ludicrous stuff. But if this has traction, again, this is where you get into the kind of disinformation side and the impact that it could have in terms of muddying the waters of the public not really paying attention, but still seeing their Facebook feeds and their Twitter feeds and whatnot. So
yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, that's obnoxious and it's a nuisance and it's a distraction, and all those things can get in the way of campaign goals that are working in the opposite direction. But I mean, what I've said in this piece today is that empathy is going to be, if there's an Achilles heel in Carney, is that he just does not relate to the average schmo. He's been hanging around central banks and corporations for so long. He's got no common touch whatsoever, and the extent to which he can get things done, he may not get them done for the right reason. He'll get them done for the wrong reason. And whether Polyev can pull that off, I don't know. But the other thing too, I think we've talked about this a little bit before, is I used to ignore Poilievre until he ran for the leadership, and he raised $6 million. And this was at a time when the Conservatives were kind of nowhere, and that's more money than Mark Carney has raised right now. And my first response was, "What the hell is going on here?" That I don't know. And so I went on YouTube and looked at some of his speeches, and they were impressive. I mean, he has got an innate kind of ability to communicate directly and talk about, the mom who can't afford the milk for her son when she can't breastfeed, and the 30-year-old who's got to live in his mom's basement to his ever shame and can't invite his girlfriend over. But very relatable stuff. And sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, and that's why he's not going to have any press on his campaign. I think you saw that
unreal.
his strength is that kind of direct communication, the way Trump does it. And I had a similar attitude. I ignored him too until the convoy, right? The Freedom Convoy, because he was really crafty at the way in which he used that to kind of walk this fine line between the obvious extremists and the populists. But to your point, he was tapping into the fundraising because there was a lot of money flowing around that.
But without ever really getting fully trapped in it. I mean, if you say which ones of the leaders are anti-vaxxers, I think the majority response would be none of them.
Yeah. Well, and in his case, he's got backbenchers who are absolutely nuts.
Oh, yes.
And that's where, kind of like the Orange Crush, when the NDP had that surge federally, and they all of a sudden had these MPs who did not even think that they were going to be elected MPs. The Tories may have a similar problem if they had that kind of electoral success.
Oh, no, there's no question. And again, I can remember back in the old days when I worked for the Progressive Conservatives, they'd have that problem with their Quebec. I remember Mulroney when he won in 1984, because they'd never had any seats in Quebec at all. So anyone who wanted to be their candidate could get the nomination. And so you had all of these nut bars in there. And all of a sudden, you start seeing a big sweep, and they're all becoming members of parliament. It's like, whoa, what do we do with these crazy emmers?
Yes.
Anyway.
Fun times in Canadian politics, that's for sure. But in America, the political situation obviously is both more surreal, but also with higher stakes. And I think there is a feeling, certainly amongst the Americans that I'm plugged into, that something's got to be done. That greater action needs to be taken. Why don't you start us off? What are you seeing when you're looking at the U.S.?
Well, we talked about AOC and Bernie Saunders, and those town halls that they're holding, largely in Republican areas, are growing and growing and growing. And the people who are there are more and more animated. I mean, what I saw yesterday, which I'd yet to see, was a Democratic town hall where the people who were attending were scolding the Democrats for not being tough enough, not being radical enough, saying, "You've got to fight for us," and you're just rolling over and doing nothing, and you're ineffective. And when you get that kind of public malaise, I mean, we were talking about this before, and it's reflecting something that's much, much larger. We haven't seen a huge shift in voter preference in the United States. In fact, the Democrats are at an all-time low right now, 27% approval rating. That's unheard of. Because they always were like the Liberals. I mean, the majority party in Canada, or even in Trump's approval rating hasn't really gone down that much. But below that, expectations, fears of unemployment, expectations of rising inflation, pessimism about the future, both at the public level and at the business level, have all gone up precipitously in the last 4 weeks, 3 weeks. And, we talk about vox populi, that this is the ultimate guardrail. It's not the courts. It's a public that will resist the leadership and the direction, and will not let leaders go by virtue of voicing their unhappiness and rail against them. And so, if you're looking at what's happening in those town halls, Republican and Democrat, you say, wow, I mean, we've got an electorate that is out of sync, not with one party, but with the whole political system right now.
And that's dangerous, both in terms of, whether there's an electoral response or an electoral solution, or, whether there is a place to have a reasonable nonviolent dialogue on common ground. And I think the Democrats right now as a microcosm may be the litmus test of whether dialogue is possible in America, because I am increasingly seeing a real divide between the moderates and the progressives.
Right.
And to the extent that I think the progressives are no longer even calling themselves progressives. They are now calling themselves democratic socialists, right? Because that's the language that Bernie's
That's the
using. That's
Bernie
the
language.
language
Yeah.
that AOC is using. And what's changed for me over this week in terms of my view is I think there's a lot of people who are now getting behind AOC as a future Democratic leader. Where I think a lot had my reaction where they saw Bernie and they're like, man, he's yesterday's guy.
Yeah, he's just too old.
He's not up for this challenge. And in him inviting her to headline this tour that they've got going, and they were in Arizona last night, and it was huge. Like, this was a massive stadium, packed, and people just electric and happy. And yet, at the same time, the language I'm hearing from the moderate Democrats is it's the progressives' fault. They went too left.
Yes,
Right. The reason the Democrats are sunk right now is they need to go in the middle and they need to go in the center. And I don't see any dialogue between those two sides.
You made the point in our last podcast, and I'd kind of missed this myself, that, because a lot of the stuff that she says is incendiary on the identity politics stuff, we tend not to hear a lot of the stuff that is really, really emotionally compelling and resonates.
Blue collar stuff.
Blue collar workers and the average person with their needs and how they're falling behind. And if she could stay focused on that, and or the traditional, so that she's not say, oh, look at the light bulb over here, kind of thing to attract to, then that'd be very, very interesting.
And I think the core of your criticism, and this is generally a criticism that's being made of the Democrats right now, is they constantly react to Republicans. They fall into Republicans' frames. Republicans pick the battles, Democrats react to the battles, and it's always on the Republican terms. And that's the culture war. Right? That's where the Republicans keep distracting them and making about the culture war. What they need to be doing now is focusing on economic issues, right? Focusing on the kind of needs of working class Americans. We were struggling and continue to struggle. Because the other parallel track, and I'm not changing subjects, I'm more trying to bring our subjects parallel, is this whole reshoring manufacturing rhetoric. And I say rhetoric because I think the subtext to it, and I wish the Democrats were to focus on this, is automation, right? Like, a lot of the manufacturing that's going to come back to the United States will not result in jobs, right? It may result in cheaper goods. It may result in greater resiliency at home, but we are not going to see a return to old school industrial American employment. And I wish the Democrats could make that argument, because they are at danger, to your point, of not only being distracted, but being outgunned on the economic development piece. Like, if the Republicans can lie about the jobs that they're creating and the impact they're making on the economy, then the Democrats are fucked.
Well, and not just to call the Republicans out on that, but to offer an alternative vision where that average blue collar person who fears automation. Think about autonomous vehicles for a second. There's 1,000 people in Canada who are employed driving vehicles of one description, the buses, trains, taxi cabs, Ubers, trucks, obviously. Multiply that by 10 in America. So what is the answer for those people for someone to say these are the kind of jobs that are going to be available for you? And then, look, not all automation is a job replacer. You're looking at the logistics field, for example, automotive.
But even then, I think the Democrats could make a really strong argument. And this is where it would be interesting if the Democrats in Silicon Valley started speaking up, because there are some. Right? Like, there still are lots of huge Democrat, capital D Democrats in Silicon Valley who could come together with an AOC, with a Democrat, and say, we have a vision for automation that won't displace workers. You know, we have a vision for automation that will improve the quality of life of everyone, make workplaces safer, you know, make work more meaningful, because that research exists, right? There's no like there's, you know, for example, to use the logistics guy, it's one driver and a fleet of vehicles, right? So you still have to have that driver, but you're increasing the capacity. So there's different models from a regulatory environment, from a policy environment, and because the Democrats have ceded that ground, right? Because the right has kind of embraced the vision of technology, again, it goes to my point that Democrats are reacting. They're constantly reacting to frames rather than saying, here's an alternate vision of how we see a prosperous America, a middle class America. And I kick myself. I think a lot of people are kicking the Democrats as to why they're not doing that, right? Why they're not exploring that.
Well, let me offer an alternative example that fits that very same paradigm that you will probably disagree with me on. And that is what is going on, first with Doge generally, but with the Department of Education more specifically. I mean, where the Republicans do these things, and the Democrats, you know, their hair goes on fire. And if they just go nuts and say, you know, Donald Trump is a fascist and he hates, you know, poor people, and he doesn't want to be anyone to be educated. And rather than starting on the assumption that, you know what, there is waste and inefficiencies in government. And so what we've got to do is do this smart, and we're capable of doing that rather than stupid.
Yes.
Which you guys are. I've been really interesting to watch the Department of Education stuff unfold. I mean, you know me. I mean, I am a huge believer in education and have been ever since I was 6 years old. I mean, my father told me that, you know, good education was the key to success, and he wasn't lying to me. And you continue. You can see this. You heard it in my.
Well, and to your point, in an alternate universe, your professor emeritus recently retired as the chair of the political science department. Yes. Right? Like there is an alternate world in which you went on that life track.
And they're also, I mean, the evidence is incontrovertible, is that the single best investment you can make in your life is education. Every year of additional education, there's a straight line relationship to net worth. That all said, is there a federal Department of Education in Canada? No, there isn't. Has anyone been advocating for one? No, there isn't. Does the federal government put money into post-secondary education? Yes, they do, but not through a former bureaucracy. Now, here we've got a similar situation where, you know, 90% of all funding for schools is at the state and municipal level. All curriculum, all teacher hiring, all of the kind of rules and regulations are set at the state and local level. So maybe we actually don't need a federal Department of Education. Maybe there's a whole bunch of stuff maybe the federal Department of Education does that's really important. And there's no question in terms of, you know, redistributing taxpayers' dollars into neighborhoods that require that kind of funding most, you know, people who have disabilities and special needs. And, you know, clearly it's done some remarkable stuff on student loans and scholarships, health scholarships
but
as well. But that doesn't mean you need a massive bureaucracy.
Yeah. And you make you make a good point about the framing that in this case, rather than constantly react, and I think part of the owning the libs, right, is trying to provoke the cliche that the liberals are just going to complain, that they're just going to say, oh, the world is ending. Whereas I think in this case, if they were to call their bluff, if they were to say, yeah, you're right, education in America is broken, let's wipe out the Department of Education, let's have a conversation about education policy. And then if the Democrats wanted to go on the offensive, they would say, because we all know they want to privatize. Right? And what we want is public education. And we want to eliminate that waste, eliminate bureaucracy to invest in pub. So that way they change the channel, right? They rob the frame.
And they not only rob the frame, now they're on stronger terrain because they've got these guys advancing private education where they're advocating public education, which we know politically is far more acceptable and supported than the alternative approaches.
Yeah. But again, we're sitting here. I think we're performing basic political logic, And the Democrats are still struggling to come up with some sense of coherence.
We should be running the DNC, Jesse, you and me.
If I think there are a lot of podcasts right now. If we had a Google analyst to say how many podcasts the last 2 weeks, which the host said we should be running the DNC, right, it would be a very popular phrase. But to go to where you started, I think the tolerance for this has come to an end. I think Americans in general. I don't know if you've caught Bill Burr is doing the nightly talk shows. He's got a new comedy special out, so he's on the promo circuit.
Well, he's tough, I tell you. When he is angry, there's no one who's angrier.
And he has kind of by default become the voice of the, you've got AOC on the kind of grassroots and you've got Bill Burr on the kind of prime time. And the stuff he's saying is electric. Wow. And the one description I've heard of it is he is the one person in America saying the things that makes the TV hosts uncomfortable, that makes the establishment uncomfortable, and everyone wants to hear it, and everyone needs to hear it. And the main thing he's saying is, where the fuck are the Democrats? Like, wake the fuck up.
I'll have to catch up, because I've often found him, he is too kind of crude for me. I don't want to sound like a prude.
Yeah.
Crude. But if he is angry for a reason, as opposed to just wanting to shock the shit out of me, then he's a comedian probably worth listening to.
It's probably a little bit of both. I had the same reaction to him, that he feels a little bit too much like a shock jock without the substance. Yeah. But I think he has finally found the substance, because he's reading the room enough to realize no one else is doing it, and it's a real opportunity from a commercial perspective. But I really feel that in the next few weeks we're gonna see some kind of other shoe drop. And I say this either on the regime side, that they're going to try to create more distraction, right, to make sure that the Democrats continue to be flat-footed, that they continue to be react, or we are going to see civil society start to say, look, we've been waiting long enough. And the example I wrote about today was these Tesla protests.
Right.
Because to me, they're kind of comical. I didn't realize they were having an impact until I started kind of reading what's happening to Tesla stock, right? How the used market for Tesla
and their sales, just in the dumper.
Yeah, so this is, kind of harken back to the South African boycotts, where this really feels like this is this confluence of consumer sentiment. Because I heard this interview about who's showing up to these protests, and it's only maybe 1/5 of people who are against Elon Musk. The other 4/5 are your usual protests, that it's everyone with every issue. Right? Like, it is a full grab bag but that's the point. Like, everyone said, well, we're not going to go to the town square, right? We're not going to go to the state house. Like, it's just by default becoming the Tesla lots, because that's just to your point, everyone's getting pissed off and they're going to where everyone else is, and that's the Tesla dealership. So I find it surreal.
Again, you talk about brand juxtaposition, though. I mean, the fact that I don't know if you've been to California in the last couple of years, but first you're struck by the incidence of Tesla vehicles that are on the road, and they're all Democrats who are driving them, all of them. And so now you've got this complete dissonance between what was the traditional brand of the Tesla model and what is now the current brand of Elon Musk. And so there's no constituency left for him. And that's why I think, you're absolutely right, except the constituency of protest, the constituency of kind of visceral anger that is there. I want to shift gears just a little bit, because the Musk thing is part of this. And because you might have a perspective on this that I'm finding just baffling. And it starts with people like Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos, who were vocally anti-Trump during the first term. And you're hard pressed to believe, I mean, if you were a billionaire, that you would be so fucking venal that you wanted more money, that you would throw your reputation right into the shitter as a philanthropist, as an enlightened human being, as an innovator, and just become an ass kisser to someone who your natural constituency thinks is a clown and an idiot. And I don't understand what's going on in their minds. I really don't.
I kind of put it into two categories, and this is where, even though he is one of the world's biggest assholes, props to Bill Gates, because he clearly
Yeah.
doesn't give a fuck. He's just like,
Well,
I'm gonna do what I do anyway. I'm rich enough. I'm gonna keep giving my money away. Him and Warren Buffett are just sitting this one out.
and you don't see them at inaugural balls
No,
or
no. And in fact, I did see interview because Gates, for other reasons, was on a bit of a publicity tour, and he was saying very critical stuff of the administration. Like
yeah.
he is a guy who he doesn't care. He's going to be Bill Gates till he dies, and he's totally been infected with Warren Buffett's view on philanthropy. So he's going to do everything he can to give away all his money. By the time he dies, I think there's two types. I think there's the ideologues like Musk, like Thiel. And I wonder if Zuckerberg
who are libertarians,
yes,
at heart, and were before Trump came on the scene.
yes, and
Yes.
not just libertarians, techno libertarians. Like
Right.
they believe that technology enables a kind of libertarianism that they have been destined to achieve. I do believe Zuckerberg is seduced by that. I think he's always flirted with it. I think Zuckerberg is an interesting kind of example of someone in the middle, because I don't think he's ideological, but I do think he's surrounded by ideological people. Because
Of the same stripe as the Teals and the Musks.
yes, because Musk Zuckerberg's trajectory changed dramatically when Sheryl Sandberg left.
Right.
And Sheryl Sandberg was and is a big D Democrat, like Clinton Democrat.
Yeah.
And a lot of the original Facebook executives were Obama people. So for a long time, the company, Zuckerberg, was surrounded by powerful Democrats. But then he hired Nick Clegg from the UK, and he started to hire Tories, conservatives, especially international conservatives, European conservatives, because he saw the EU, understandably, as a regulatory enemy.
Yes.
And he was hiring. Yeah, he was hiring people who were helping the government relations work. And I think as part of the changing, because he also got roped into the masculinity Joe Rogan bullshit, right? So I think he was.
Can't think of someone who's less credible talking about masculinity.
Yes.
than,
right,
than
like
Mark Zuckerberg.
But this
Holy
is
mackerel.
not to tangent. This is on St. Patrick's Day, the White House having Conor McGregor, right? The
MMA
yeah,
guy.
yeah. So I think Zuckerberg was just ideologically vulnerable. I think he's just gullible. I think he sees an opportunity for this techno utopia that these guys believe in. Bezos, I think, is different. I think Bezos is part of a whole nother category of these guys that they are just dumb. They are just making mistakes. They're I don't think they have what you and I have, what critical thinking people have, which is the ability to distinguish what people say and what they do, and what is a trend versus what is a long-term historical thing. And I think Bezos is making a huge mistake, fundamentally. And he's someone who could have easily sat this out and just said, I don't want to be involved. I'll just go whichever way the wind goes. Versus the other person I'm kind of disappointed with, and I think we could see a real corporate downturn here, is Apple and Tim Cook.
Right.
Because to your point about Tesla buyers, Apple buyers are buying for privacy, right? They're buying for like all these democratic ideals. And not only has Apple screwed up the last two product launches terribly, right? Like the tech world is getting really critical of Apple, but they are the most vulnerable when it comes to manufacturer reshoring. Because they can't make the iPhone without China. Right. They can't make the iPhone without Southeast Asia.
Taiwan as well. Yeah.
And they were the ones when Obama was like, hey, how come you can't make more iPhones in America? That's when they were just like, Obama, you have no clue how this is done. So the fact that they are kowtowing to Trump makes no sense to me.
Move beyond the individual CEO kowtowing to what we're also seeing now in the last little while is corporation after corporation after corporation standing up and making public pledges to invest in America. Johnson & Johnson did it today, Eli Lilly the other day, NVIDIA the other day, Apple made a big OpenAI earlier, and SoftBank, over $1 trillion in the last 2 months, which is, if you give Donald Trump any credit for anything, what he wants to do is try to resurrect the manufacturing base of that nation. And these people are all responding in a very, very kind of positive way, which, to your point about the economic realities of a global worldwide supply chain like Apple has, could be tremendously against your best interest in terms of your competitive ability to, sell against Samsung.
Yeah. Or not just sell against Samsung, like already a new Apple phone costs $1,200.
Yeah, I know.
If they made it in America, you're talking $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Who's gonna buy that?
Yeah.
Like, that's to your point where the logic doesn't go there. But to your point about these pledges to reshore manufacturing, on the one hand, I think it is brilliant policy, because this is the biggest wedge between the Democratic moderates and the Democratic socialists, because the moderates love this. They're jealous of it. They wish they did it, right? And they are sitting there going, we can't run against this policy. We need to. So they are not going to agree to a shift to the left if they fundamentally believe that this reshoring manufacturing is A, real, or B, going to work. And I wonder, to the point about these pledges, where their agenda overlaps with the Trumps is consumer sentiment.
Yeah.
Like, they need to make sure that consumer sentiment, especially if they know there's going to be turbulence in the short term with these tariffs, and it's going to create economic hardship, maybe a recession, they need to be telling Americans, we are investing in you. We're coming back to you. Buy our products, when they're potentially being demonized. Otherwise,
J&J is a global company. They sell all over the world. They don't want to be. They want to be known as global. I see, and again, I'm not challenging you. I'm confused by the whole thing. I've worked with business leaders virtually my entire adult life, and I know they don't like standing up and making those kind of statements, because they don't like tying their hands, knowing that fleet of footness at the end of the day is probably the ultimate litmus of how effective they are as business leaders. But you're just seeing all of this behavior coming out of the American business community right now. That and I find it incomprehensible to believe that they're intimidated by politics. I mean, anyway,
I think some are intimidated. I think some are happy. Right? I think some feel that this is the guy who is really going to make a climate that is, like, I think the delusion that moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans are telling themselves is that this is an act, that this is temporary, that this erraticism has a logic behind it, and that it will end and things will go back to normal. I think that is delusional. But my other thought, to your point about I agree, the total uncharacteristic behavior of these business leaders, maybe they're thinking that they can just give lip service. That if the president can give lip service, they can get lip service, and their corporate plans are private anyway.
Just performative. Let's get in the news.
Yeah. And maybe assign one person to come up with the scenario of if they did, right? So that they could actually say they're working on it and they have to kind of press the button. But I think, to go back to your larger point about category destruction, we may be seeing a category destruction when it comes to trust and reputation. That if it no longer matters that what you say is credible, because the leader of the free world, quote unquote, what he says is a very slippery slope. Right. And I think the arrogance that might be happening here is that these American business leaders think that they can say one thing to the American market while they say something completely different elsewhere.
Again, am I being overly Pollyannish here? Is there any prospect that what these people are doing, and they're almost all guys, are saying, look, if we can demonstrate to Donald Trump that we would voluntarily reshore, that we would invest in America, maybe there'll be no need for tariffs? Am I giving them more of the benefit of the doubt than they deserve?
No, I think that they are thinking that. And maybe Lutnick is telling them that, right? Because Lutnick is the kind of guy who would say that even if it wasn't true,
When he's
right?
telling some people behind doors what we're not hearing, because they're
Yes.
coming back from behind those doors saying, holy shit, this guy actually knows what he's doing. There's a
Yeah.
plan here
Yeah.
that is not nuts, that it actually has got, a mid and long-term goal and is achievable.
But to your point, that tactic only works for so long. Like at some point you have to deliver. Right? At some point, there has to be stability. At some point, he has to say, okay, we've done our move fast and break things. Now we're going to build. We're going to create a new regulatory environment. We're going to create a new advanced manufacturing sector. That's where I wonder if he needs to be constantly creating a crisis, to constantly changing the channel. But here's another interesting corporate anecdote that befuddles me. So Ben and Jerry's ice cream,
Yes.
got bought by Unilever a couple of
Yeah.
years ago.
And they're attacking Unilever now. Yeah.
Well, but as part of the agreement, they were promised full autonomy,
Yeah.
their own board and their own marketing, because they said, look, our brand has values. People buy our product because of our cheeky messaging. We want to retain that. And Unilever has been, for the last 6 months, like even before Trump, has been in conflict with them constantly. They're now trying to fire the entire board. They fired the CEO.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why does Unilever care? They're a huge company. Ben and Jerry's is profitable. Let Ben and Jerry's be the crazy radical selling ice cream. What does it matter?
Control, 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 control. Now, listen, I know that we've got a 1 hour PP pants limit on the show. So before we end, I want to introduce one more thing, because we've talked today about, and many times, about the fissure in the Democratic alliance and coalition, and also just how effective Trump has been in making sure that hasn't happened on the Republican side. We've got a big budget coming up. The tax cut math just does not work. I mean, you've got $4.5 trillion that's going to cost the Treasury for an extension, which some Republican senators are saying, well, that's not really, that's already there. So it's not new money. It's, it's ridiculous what they're saying. But then you add on to that the no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, lower base rate for deductions, lower base rate for Social Security checks, and underscoring this, a promise of $2 trillion in tax cuts in spending. If the Trump wants to get its way, he is going to be alienating the real fiscal conservatives, who just for whom, and again, I hope I'm not wishful thinking here, they went to Washington because they are fiscal conservatives. I don't agree with them, but they're fiscal conservatives. The notion of driving up tremendous debt and a tremendous deficit year in and year out is completely anathema to their entire being. And so you've got the prospect, I think, coming around the corner of a big fight within the Republican Party between the Trump acolytes and the hardline economic conservatives. And that also could add to, the kind of watch what's going on out there, my friends, because what happening today is not going to be happening what's in 2 weeks' time.
And what will be interesting is whether they are successful at keeping that conflict behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Because they have all the incentive to do it, in contrast to the Democrats. And I almost want to call them our sister podcast, because I will probably reference them often. So I now listen regularly to my friends in the Indiana Democratic apparatus on their Left of Center podcast.
Okay, sure.
And they made the same argument. They basically said, right now there's 4 kind of proto-political parties in the United States. You got the Democratic Socialists, you got the moderate Democrats, you got the old school Republicans, and you got the MAGA crowd.
Right.
And, the old school Republicans and the MAGA crowd have been getting along for a while, but to your point, that's not going to last. And I think it's the exact same analogy that we're drawing with the business community, that the fiscal conservatives are anxious, they are nervous, and they need to see an outcome. They need to see a promise. They need to see a stability, because I think they are the ones feeling the heat from American industry more directly.
Oh, for
right?
sure.
Because they're the ones who can access it. But here's my thought on why, the Americans would learn so much from Canada if those moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats got together, boom, that's how you get rid of Trump right there. And where the
Tories and blue liberals.
exactly, and where I think the Democrats might be scared enough to do it is when AOC starts to become really fucking popular. Because what's interesting about Mayor Tom, the host of this podcast, is he's a moderate. He is very much a centrist Democrat, but he's also smart. And he also, like he hates the DNC. He's like, look, Bernie would have won. Everyone knows that Bernie would have won had the DNC not sabotaged it. Same way
by sending all those delegates at large for Clinton.
Yeah, the same way that Biden would never have been the candidate last time had the DNC not shut it all down. Like, they should have had an open primary. So I think there is an awareness of the power that the left on the Democrats have, and that if there isn't an organized contest, if the moderates don't really get their acts together, the party's going to shift hard left. And I think you could have an opportunity for that middle group to kind of seize the elect, because that's America, right? That is fundamentally where America is. Sure. But I don't know if the party culture would allow that to happen.
No, well, there's much more polarization in America than in Canada. You're absolutely right. I mean, most Americans still are reasonable. They're not QAnon on one hand or, deficit anal on the other. Now, speaking of which, talk about the guests we're going to have.
So Monday, we got Bill Fox, who we've mentioned a few times here on the podcast, a former journalist, former communications strategist, current wise intellectual. I think we want to talk to him about a lot of stuff, politics, social media. I want to talk to him about Yemen and East Africa.
Yeah, where he's been.
Because he has a lot of professional experience there, and I think he's going to have a very interesting perspective. So I am super excited about Bill joining us. And then on Wednesday, John LaFave, who is one of the Salt Spring Mafia, as Avi Lewis called him, in terms of some crazy ex-hippies. And John is one of the only lefties I know who is in the trenches really engaging MAGA people, Canadian MAGA, American MAGA people online, trying to have rational dialogue with them. So maybe we'll hear about the war in the trenches in that regard. All right, we're out. Thanks again, Alan. Thanks, everyone. And we'll talk to everyone soon.